to repeal that resolution. I'd like to see that go to a second reading at the next work session. Staff will be able to come to us with law department with some sort of groundwork for a new agreement, and we continue to move that forward until we have an agreement, as well as the resolution to repeal that mentions an agreement that we don't have. That's my way forward. Additionally, my apologies. Additionally, my question would be, there was another topic that was also discussed, Mr. Vice Mayor, was a letter to the school board about some of our discussions. Was that letter ever generated?
It was not, Mr. Shaw. So the follow-up was between Tony and me, and frankly, I'm not entirely certain I recall what the reasons were, but it was indicated to me. I asked Tony to draft that letter, and again, I'm not throwing Mr. Rogers under the bus, but I think because perhaps some of the confusion we were getting out of the law department, it didn't, and now this meeting has taken place. So that meeting was never sent.
Yeah, and the letter was supposed to go after these actions had been taken, and when the actions subsequently were not taken, the decision was to hold off on the letter until all these points were clarified, so that if Mr. Morgan was going to be presenting a letter to the schools on behalf of council, that we understood where we stood on these issues.
Thank you for helping my memory here.
And Mr. Vice Mayor, just so I'm clear, I'm not talking about repealing that resolution until we have the agreement in place so it can be done simultaneously. But I think we do need to start the path forward and start talking about a new agreement.
My only question to Mr. Schomer and Mr. McDonald, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Shaw, but if your intent is to hold that line until there's a path forward, it sounds to me like we're on a different course. We're on a course of this payments could be made unless council proactively steps in and stops it. Is that correct, Mr. McDonald or Schomer?
Well, I would agree that we need to address it through a negotiated agreement. And I think that allows and brings the boards together, administration
I
together.
think that's all of our goals.
Right.
I guess what I'm asking is if we hold this line, if Mr. Shaw's scenario plays out and we're hearing a piece of legislation that would repeal the former resolution that authorized this, could it be that the calendar clicks a particular day and finance cuts a check because that's the current law in your mind?
Yes.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, until it's repealed, that is what we're doing.
Right. So I think we need to understand, if I'm understanding your proposal, Mr. Shaw, correctly, we need to understand what is that date from staff that we're working against. Because we have some council members here who are saying continue the course, continue the payment. We have other council members saying stop that. It sounds like in order to proactively stop it, we must act as a council.
Yes, and by having a resolution to repeal the resolution brought forward, however, you run the risk of initiating a vote on that resolution at the time that it's presented, and even though it may not be council's desire to repeal it, it may be called to a vote and then actually repealed it. So if the purpose and action is to meet with the school and to discuss this, then I would suggest that you meet with the school and discuss this. If the intention is to repeal it, then put forward a resolution and repeal it. If the intention is to negotiate an agreement so that we can set and establish stronger terms in identifying and defining what the payment is, well, then let's move forward with that path, establish a resolution and a commensurate agreement with it.
Let me clarify my question. What is the date that check is going to get cut?
I don't know.
Can you let us know that?
Yes.
Okay. Because I think
That's an important piece.
Mr. Shaw, the question is, because I agree with you, Mr. Schomer, that those are our paths forward.
Yes.
I think all of us agree, but I don't want to speak for council, that we'd like to resolve this. I think we have two different thought patterns in how to resolve it. But
is it dependent on when the check is issued as to whether your desire to repeal it or not applies?
No, I think the question of Mr. Shaw is, let's continue to hold the line on getting their attention by not cutting the check. What I'm trying to establish is that check is going to go out this door with or without council soon. So Mr. Shaw could find himself in a situation where
we're administratively holding the check until we have a decision.
That's not what I heard earlier, Mr. Schomer. What I heard earlier is you all feel like you are obligated by the law to cut that check at some point in the future.
I think that that we've got the authority to do that. I'm sorry if I miss it. In other words, if we went reading to reading to reading, if we decided, can we go ahead, if we haven't repealed it, can we utilize the current legislation to continue to pay it? Yes, I think we could. it would be against my recommendation because I think before we make the payment that we have a structured agreement in place to do so.
I think we agree.
Yes.
I think I'll put a point on this. I think the fear for people like me who are saying we should continue to withhold it until that structured payment is in place is that I might wake up one day and have the law director and the city manager say, the law supports the position, we just cut the check and send it. And I'm not saying you would even be wrong to do that based on the resolution in place and a budget that has authorized that expenditure.
Then if that's where we were, how about a resolution that repeals a current resolution but indicates that until such time an agreement can be made and
Yes.
structured to initiate the pilot payment?
Would that satisfy your proposal, Mr. Shaw?
I'm on board.
Okay. Mr. Campbell.
Rob Schomer,
Yes.
realistically, you're not going to cut and issue that check
No.
after tonight's discussion.
No, sir.
You don't need a piece of legislation repealing anything, do you?
No, I don't believe that we do. I think that it is within our rights to not.
Okay, so
Do that.
so now we've understood what our rights are. I'm asking you as our employee, you would not cut that check and issue it to the schools
No,
after
not
the
at,
discussion.
not at all. No,
Okay.
not until we have a structured agreement or until I get certain direction otherwise.
Jerry, would it be proper to pass legislation on Monday authorizing the city manager to negotiate with the school an agreement and bring it back to us?
Yeah, that's perfectly acceptable.
And Rob, you don't feel comfortable issuing the check today based on the legislation that you've discovered?
Yes, although I know that we can make an argument that it is legal, I have concerns.
Yeah, concerns. Yeah, I didn't, I think it's perfectly legal because we've done it for how many years?
Yes. But now that we know
But
and
you
are
feel
aware,
uncomfortable based on what you've looked at since this subject has been brought up. Is that correct?
since it's under the microscope, yes.
Yes. So I think the appropriate piece of legislation would be to authorize Rob to
Yes.
negotiate a new agreement and bring it back to council. And during that legislative period, you're not going to cut them a check, are you?
No.
Staff isn't going to forget and put it in the mail, are they?
No.
Okay.
Mr. Otto, 1 second. Mr. Shaw, is that sufficient? Is there kind of compromise position?
I would see that as a compromise position, knowing that we're not going to move forward with that.
Mr. Otto?
Okay, that was a long piece of the discussion, an important piece of the discussion. Now we go to Representative at-large Otto.
I'm having concerns with the fact that we have a piece of legislation, regardless of what it is, that's told us to write this check twice a year, every year for the last 20 years. And I'm hearing right now, oh, well, no, we're not going to do that unless council tells us to do that, which it sounds like this piece of legislation has already done that 20 years ago. Shouldn't it be the other way around? Well, we're going to have to continue to do that unless we get a vote of council that says, don't do that. It seems backwards to me. That's a question to start with, Jerry, and then I got a comment additionally.
The question was, if we do nothing, if nothing happens, if we just let things keep going, what's going on? And I said, we have a law that says we're supposed to pay.
Right.
We also have a council that is currently actively debating whether or not to repeal that law.
But we provided no official direction, correct?
This is true.
Okay.
So we have a payment that's, what I don't know sitting here right now, when is it due? In my recollection, there was some sort of April date somewhere. But also, in my discussions with Mr. Bell was that the payments don't go out on that time because of various procedural issues. And so there's no payments going to be made necessarily in April because they never have been, is my understanding. Mm-hmm. If council says don't pay this, Mr. Schomer most likely will not pay that. Council is his boss. Mm-hmm. As a law director, I would say, well, why would we pay $200,000 on something that we're not necessarily obligated to pay on, that we could repeal at any time? But there will come a time where the school could say, you have to pay, and then we would be in somewhat of a pinch if we haven't done anything by that point.
Mr. Otto, I know you have a comment.
I do.
May I interject here for a moment?
Please.
And ask kind of you a question, because I'm suspecting you're not going to support this regardless, but Mr. Campbell, Mr. Shaw, and Mr. Otto, if what Mr. Campbell suggested, which is this directing the city manager to go authorize a new agreement, if that included that our resolution that payment is to be withheld until the new agreement is in place, would that then be sufficient legal direction, Mr. McDonald, to you, to staff, to answer Mr. Otto's?
Who's providing the direction, though, Mr. Campbell or this body?
No, Mr. Otto. If it's a resolution that's on Monday night's agenda,
okay,
I'm trying to land the plane.
I got you. Okay,
You're going to have every right to either vote for it, vote against it. It
Sure.
may not even get on the agenda.
Gotcha.
So if that resolution said, Mr. Schomer, negotiate a new contract, and until that contract's in place, that payment will be withheld. Is that sufficient direction for staff?
Yes, and I would actually be more express in that resolution to say that it's an amendment to this.
Would Mr. Campbell and Mr. Shaw be okay with that
Yes.
as part of the solution? I think that makes your position stronger, and it sounds like you're still okay with it. Mr. Gatto, you have a comment.
My comment to follow up was, this resolution doesn't sound to me to be a contract per se, an exchange for goods, services, or any other type of thing. This sounds to me like a goodwill type of agreement. Have we lost that goodwill at this point, that we're using this as leverage? This sounds to me like it was put in place initially to say, hey, we understand you're potentially losing a big chunk of change by this private business holder turning his business over to the city who's purchasing it, and they don't have to pay any taxes. So we're going to go ahead and out of goodwill, we're going to go ahead and make you whole in this situation. I don't like the fact that we're using a goodwill effort as leverage at this point. That really, really sticks in my craw. I think it's, I don't know. I have issues with that, if that makes sense to you.
Thanks for your comments. Mr. Campbell.
Question to Jerry McDonald. Is this a law
Yes,
that was passed by council
yes,
in 1996?
yes,
Okay. And that's why we're paying it.
yes.
Just to clarify once again, Mr. McDonald, the resolution that you have found from 1997 mentions 1996. My apologies.
Resolution 96 R 1764.
This particular resolution mentions an agreement, which I would think, seen resolutions since I've been on this body, would be a legal binding agreement signed by some sort of city manager, but you have able to tell us that agreement is non-existent.
That's my understanding.
So without that legal signed agreement from our party and their party, I would, and again, I don't have a law degree, I would say at that point in time, that whole resolution just is null and void. I mean, again, I don't have a law degree, but that's just my personal opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Mr. Campbell.
Is that correct, Jerry?
That's a hard thing. That would be a hard thing to say right now for me to say. It is, like I said at the beginning, is a resolution that is not drafted very well. The provision in that resolution that says it can only be terminated by mutual agreement, that is not binding. The council can't make another body be in charge of city legislation. It cannot give them a veto power in essence. So that particular provision on termination is not enforceable. Whether or not the rest of it is enforceable is something that I haven't looked at in full, but my research says that we can repeal this ordinance.
Mr. Campbell.
Or resolution.
Despite the answer to that research, if we had not appropriated the money in 2019's budget, would we have had to pay it?
We would not have to have paid it, no.
Mr. Schumer.
I just want to make a point, although it might have turned into it or perceived that this is some form of leverage, as Mr. Otto referred to. I just want to remind council that this whole topic was brought forward and was discussed as part of staff's review of budgetary items and the revaluation of that payment. And we revealed that information and shared it with council regarding what was being paid. So that information might have turned into something that is now into a further discussion, but I don't interpret it as, nor has it been presented or discussed as a matter of